My name is Ayako Kano. I'm professor of Japanese studies in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations. And my specialty is Japanese cultural history. I focus on gender and performance from the late 19th century through the 20th century. I was born in Tokyo, Japan. At the age of 3, our family moved to Germany, and I lived there until the age of 8. After that, we went back to Tokyo, moved to Yokohama, Japan. Then I spent high school, 3 years of high school in the suburbs of New York, and did my undergraduate in Japan at Keio University. School was almost always fun for me, so the German Lutheran nuns taught me to read and write. I remember in elementary school, I would do the assigned homework, but I would always do extra, and I would illustrate it with sort of colored pencils. And the teacher would write back, sehr fleißig, which is very diligent. Studying and excelling in academics, I think, has been a way for me to try to belong, because socially it was hard to move around and go to a different culture, a different school, a different social circle. I remember my father telling me, "You seem to enjoy studying, you seem to enjoy reading books, you don't seem to enjoy so much being with other people, and therefore, you could become a scholar." And that's the first time I thought, oh, you could turn your studying into a job? I think that was sort of the first moment when I thought of this, whatever this was, as a possible profession. At my university, you didn't have to choose your major in the first year. So I could spend the first year just exploring whatever I wanted. And having chosen English as my major, I still had a lot of leeway in what courses to take. I was interested in music, I was interested in drama, in theater. Part of it was because growing up near New York City, my father would take us to the opera. And I think the combination of music and theater, the costumes, everything kind of sort of drew my attention. And my English professor at Keio, Professor Takamiya, is someone who encouraged me. I remember the very first time I gave a class presentation, he called me up at home and said, "If you're interested in continuing your studies in graduate school, we should talk about it and we should think about this seriously." That was probably the first moment when I felt encouraged or validated in pursuing an academic path. And then by the time I applied for graduate school, I knew I wanted to do something comparative, but without really knowing what that meant in terms of discipline. So I landed at Cornell, in some ways very lucky. It was a place where Japanese studies was done in a comparative way. And so I found it very easy to bridge being a comparative literature PhD major and sort of finding a strong focus in Japanese studies. And that's become my professional identity as well. So for my undergraduate thesis, having explored the Japanese traditional theater, it was very noticeable. It's noticeable to anyone looking at it that it's an all-male tradition. And so I was curious to see where the women were in Japanese theater. So when I started the graduate study, I thought, I want to look at women playwrights, women directors. I couldn't find too many. And so I thought, actresses. What about actresses? And when I started looking into it, it was really striking that actresses were, on the one hand, they were pioneers going into a traditionally male field, but also they were the target of a lot of gossip and criticism. And I found that to be such a paradox and kind of an interesting problem for gender studies. This was around the time when Judith Butler's Gender Studies came out, and a lot of sort of feminist criticism was helpful in trying to understand the paradoxical figure of the actress. So that became my dissertation and my first book. So this was my first job. I started at Penn in 1995. Initially, I was hired to teach modern Japanese literature. But I found that I enjoyed teaching theater, I enjoyed gender studies, and I started teaching film as well, and adaptation from fiction to film. I'm teaching right now a graduate seminar where we spend the last hour of each week talking about the arts and crafts of academic life. I'm a big believer in sort of passing on know-how, tips and tricks of the trade, so to speak, but also thinking a bit more philosophically about what it is that we do, so scholarship as an art and as a way of life. So that's something that's been on my mind. My grandfather was a pharmacist. One of the really few items I have from him is a notebook. He copied a botany textbook. I think that's how people studied back then. And it's really amazing because you can see at the beginning of the notebook, his writing is kind of tentative, and he has a lot of drawings of plants, and they are very kind of tentative drawings. By the end of the textbook and the end of the notebook, it's so much more confident and learned, embodied knowledge. And that's something that made an impression on me early on. And there's something about our learning that needs to have that kind of durational, repetitive, physical aspect to it. And it's a little bit hard to replicate that in the typing, but I try to remember when I lose my focus in the world of internet and the endless stream of knowledge that's available.